The sound of boots against gravel wasn't the first thing Sergeant Emily Carter noticed. It was the taste of blood in her mouth and the sharp ringing in her ears that anchored her back into reality. She'd been knocked down hard, her helmet rattling sideways, when one of her own squad members, furious and desperate, lashed out with the butt of his rifle and caught her square in the head. It wasn't an accident. She'd felt the rage in his swing. Her vision swam, hot pain pulsing behind her eyes as she pressed a trembling hand to her helmet strap. The dust of the Afghan valley clung to her tongue and lashes, mixing with sweat, and she fought to stay conscious. Around her, chaos screamed louder than the ringing in her ears, shouted orders, sporadic gunfire, the echo of something breaking apart in the fragile trust of her unit. Private Rains, the one who struck her, stood over her now, breathing heavy, wild-eyed. "You should have listened, Sergeant. You're gonna get us all killed out here." His voice cracked with fear disguised as fury. She coughed and spat, her hand clenching around her rifle, half raised but unsteady. For a split second, she saw the boy beneath the uniform, the terrified 19-year-old from Arkansas who had never been outside his home state before the Army plucked him up. He was shaking, jaw clenched too tight, sweat dripping off his nose. But his weapon was still in his hands, and his finger brushed dangerously close to the trigger. Carter forced herself up to one knee, ignoring the nauseating swirl in her head. "Put the weapon down, Rains. That's an order." Her voice was calm, quieter than she intended, but it cut through. She had always carried authority not in sheer volume but in conviction. Rains hesitated. The firefight beyond their ruined mud wall cover still flared, the Taliban fighters pressing hard against their position in the village. Yet here they were, wasting time, breaking apart from the inside. "Rains," she said again, slower this time, "look at me. You're scared. I know. But you take me down, this whole squad collapses. You want your buddies dead? You want your own ass dead? Is that what you want?" His jaw trembled, gun wavering. For one terrible second she thought he might actually pull the trigger. Then, with a guttural yell, he slammed the rifle butt into the dirt beside her and staggered back, hands to his head. "We're screwed. We're already dead." A mortar impact shook the ground nearby, sending dust and splinters raining down. Carter didn't have the luxury of comfort or time. She shoved the pain aside and dragged herself fully upright, barking into the comms clipped at her shoulder. "All call signs, regroup on me now. We hold this wall, we do not break. Repeat, we do not break." Her squad moved by instinct, the training buried under their panic reasserting itself. Bullets cracked against the wall as Privates Dixon and Hale slid in beside her, rifles spitting controlled bursts. Rains, still trembling, dropped into position on the other side, avoiding her eyes but firing into the treeline nonetheless. She breathed through the pounding in her skull, her mind a blur of calculations. Ammo count low. 2 injured men dragged behind the wall, 1 unconscious. Air support delayed. They were 6 against at least 30. Logic said fall back. Orders said hold. Morale said collapse. And then there was her gut, the voice that had gotten her through 2 deployments without losing her unit. If they fell back now, they'd never make it to safety. They had to hold. Dixon lay suppressing fire left flank. "Hell, keep eyes on that ridge." "Rains," she caught herself, tasting iron and fury in her mouth. "Rains, you're on reload duty. Keep everyone supplied." He glanced at her, ashamed, but nodded sharply. The next 15 minutes were a blur of fire and grit. The squad fought with everything they had, discipline seeping back into their bones, while Carter kept shouting encouragement, jokes even, anything to drown out the fear. When Dixon cursed that his rifle jammed, she quipped, "Just like your love life, huh? Always failing at the wrong time." Dixon barked a laugh even as he cleared the weapon, and that half-second of humor gave him the steadiness to keep shooting. They were bleeding time though. And blood. Carter crawled over to Corporal Owens, one of the injured, his leg shredded by shrapnel. He clutched at her vest, whispering, "We're not gonna make it, Sarge." "Yes, we are," she lied smoothly, pressing gauze into the wound. "And when we do, I'm making you buy the first round back home." He gave a weak chuckle, then hissed in pain, clutching tighter. His faith, fragile as glass, rested entirely in her voice. The sun beat mercilessly down, the air thick with cordite and dust. And then, just as Carter braced for the next wave of fire, the radio crackled. A clipped voice came through, layered with static. "Eagle 2-6, this is command. Sit tight. Package inbound. 3 minutes." Her chest tightened. Package inbound? Not ammo. Not medevac. Something else. Before she could ask, the sound split the air, the thrum of rotors. Not one but several. Shadows passed overhead, cutting across the dust-choked battlefield. 3 Black Hawks coming in low and fast, their rotors whipping the dirt into a storm. The enemy fire slowed, then faltered altogether, the insurgents diving for cover. Even they didn't expect this. Carter shielded her eyes, squinting as the first bird touched down in a swirl of grit. Doors flung open and figures in crisp uniforms poured out, not medics, not reinforcements. Generals. 3 of them. Stars gleamed on their collars, dust swirling around their polished boots as though the war itself bent for their arrival. Her squad froze, disbelief etched into their faces. Generals didn't show up on the front lines. Not here. Not ever. The tallest one, a grizzled man with a jaw like carved stone, strode straight toward Carter. His eyes flicked once at her bleeding head, then at her squad huddled behind the wall. His tone was flat, brutal, carrying the weight of decisions made far above their pay grade. This unit is shut down. Effective immediately. The words hit harder than the blow to her skull. Shut down? Out here, in the middle of combat? Her mouth went dry. Sir, she forced out, with all due respect, we're still under fire. We need orders too. You heard me, Sergeant. The general's eyes locked on hers, unblinking. Your mission is over. Pack it in. Behind her, Dixon muttered in disbelief, What the hell? Hale swore under his breath. Rains looked like he wanted to vanish into the dirt. Carter stood, shoulders squared, refusing to waver though her head screamed with pain. Sir, if we leave now we won't make it out. We've got 2 wounded who can't move fast. And the enemy? That's not your concern anymore, the general cut her off. He turned to his aides already barking logistics. Strip their gear. Retrieve intel drives. Get them on the bird. It wasn't just an order. It was a dismantling. They weren't soldiers anymore, they were liabilities being erased. Carter's hands shook around her rifle. Every instinct screamed to fight the order, to hold her ground. Her squad looked to her, eyes wide, waiting for her to decide whether they obeyed or resisted. The weight of their lives pressed on her chest, suffocating. And in that heartbeat, Carter realized the war she was in wasn't just against the men firing from the ridges. It was against her own command, against choices made in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away. Choices that crushed squads like hers without a second thought. She swallowed hard, meeting the general's cold stare. Yes, sir. But her mind raced, every nerve alight with a single truth. This wasn't over. The blades of the helicopters beat the valley into a frenzy of wind and noise. Dust swirled so thick that Emily Carter could barely see the general's face anymore, but his words still cut like steel through the chaos. Shut down, dismantled, stripped. She stood frozen, her squad behind her, each one bracing for an order she didn't want to give. Sergeant, Dixon rasped, his voice nearly lost in the roar of rotors. What the hell does that mean? Shut down? They can't just pull us out like broken parts. They just did, Hale muttered bitterly, spitting grit from his teeth. His rifle still pointed toward the treeline, where the enemy had gone quiet, either regrouping or watching with equal confusion. Carter's heart hammered. Her skull throbbed where Rains had struck her, every pulse of blood behind her eyes a reminder of fragility. And yet all she felt was the boiling urge to resist. They had fought tooth and nail to hold this village, spilling sweat and blood into the dirt, and now 3 generals were going to toss them onto a bird like trash? The tallest general waved again at the aides. Get their weapons. Collect drives and maps. No traces left. Move. Wait. Carter stepped forward, planting herself between her squad and the approaching aides. The wind from the rotors lashed at her uniform, whipping strands of hair across her face, but her stance didn't waver. Sir, you're ordering us to abandon 2 critically wounded men. You're ordering us to abandon cover. You're not pulling us out, you're handing us over. The general's eyes narrowed. For a moment, silence fought the roar around them. Then his lips curved, not in a smile but in something colder. You don't need to understand the larger picture, Sergeant. You need to follow orders. Rains shifted nervously, his weapon sagging. Hale cursed under his breath again, too loud this time. Dixon gripped his rifle tighter, a question burning in his eyes as he looked at Carter. Do we obey or do we fight? The aides came closer, one already reaching for Hale's rifle. Instinct took over. Hale shoved him back, snarling. Dixon lifted his rifle halfway before stopping himself. The tension cracked like lightning across the squad, raw and immediate. Stand down. Carter barked. Her own rifle lifted, not at the generals, not at the aides, but high in the air, barrel vertical. Her voice was sharp, absolute. Weapons up, fingers off triggers. That's an order. We do not shoot friendlies. It was the hardest order she'd ever given, because her gut screamed for rebellion. But she knew one stray bullet would brand them traitors forever. The aides froze, eyes darting to the general for guidance. The man's jaw tightened. Then with glacial calm he gestured. Leave them their rifles. For now. Get the wounded onto the bird. Sergeant Carter, you'll accompany me? Carter's stomach twisted. Sir, my place is with my squad. Your place, the general said, voice low enough to cut through only to her, is wherever we decide it is. Don't make me repeat myself. The rotors thundered louder as the second helicopter touched down. Medics jumped out, sprinting toward Owens and Vickers, the wounded. Relief cracked through Carter's chest for half a breath. At least they weren't being left to die. But it didn't change the betrayal thrumming beneath her skin. The squad moved mechanically, lifting Owens onto a stretcher, hauling Vickers between them. Raines tried to steady himself, fumbling through reloads for Dixon and Hale as though clinging to routine. Dixon muttered, "This is bullshit," under his breath, but he still obeyed when Carter shot him a warning glance. Minutes later they were airborne. The valley shrank beneath them, a swirl of dirt and gunfire swallowed by distance. None of them spoke. Even Dixon's constant muttering went silent. Only the sound of the rotors filled the cabin, a relentless drumbeat over their silence. Carter sat across from her men, helmet in her lap, staring at them one by one. Dixon, jaw tight, fury written across every line of his face. Hale, knuckles white around his rifle, gaze fixed on nothing. Raines, pale and hollow-eyed, guilt etched deep into his expression. And Owens and Vickers, strapped down, clinging to life in the care of the medics. Her squad. Her responsibility. Her family in this forsaken war. And now, hanging by threads she couldn't see. The general sat at the front of the helicopter, headset pressed against his ear, talking in clipped phrases. Carter couldn't make out the words, but the look on his face was stone. When he finally turned back to her, his stare pinned her like a target. You've done enough here, Sergeant. You'll be debriefed when we land. Until then, keep your squad in line. The words burned, but she said nothing. She had no power here, not yet. The base they landed at was one she didn't recognize. Not the usual forward operating outpost with its dust-blown tents and weary soldiers, but something sharper, cleaner. Steel walls, antennas, security at every checkpoint. Her squad exchanged looks, unsettled, but followed orders as they were ushered into a stark, windowless room with metal benches. The door slammed shut behind them. Lock. Dixon broke first. What the hell is this, Sarge? We just get yanked out mid-firefight, dumped here, and no one tells us a damn thing? This ain't normal. No kidding, Hale muttered, pacing. Shut down the unit? What does that even mean? We're not machines you just switch off. Raines sat hunched, head in his hands. He muttered something too soft to hear, maybe a prayer, maybe just broken words. Carter stood at the center, helmet under her arm, forcing her voice steady. Listen up. I don't know what the bigger picture is, but I know this. Losing our cool in here won't help us. We wait. We watch. We figure out what's going on and we stick together. That's how we survive. Her voice steadied them, at least for now. Dixon stopped pacing. Hale leaned against the wall, still scowling but calmer. Even Raines looked up, searching her face for something to hold on to. Hours passed before the door finally opened. A young officer entered, clipboard in hand. He avoided eye contact with all of them as he called out, "Sergeant Carter. You're wanted in briefing room 3. Carter glanced at her squad. Stay sharp. I'll be back. The officer led her through sterile hallways that reeked of disinfectant and bureaucracy. They stopped at a steel door. Inside, 3 generals waited, the same who had landed in the valley. A projector flickered to life on the wall, displaying satellite images of the village they'd just fought in. Sergeant Carter, the tallest general began, folding his arms, your unit stumbled into an operation classified above your clearance level. That's why we intervened. Carter stiffened. With respect, sir, my unit wasn't stumbling. We were holding the line. We were doing our job. The second general, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipped voice, cut in. And in doing so, you nearly exposed assets that cannot be compromised. There are layers to this war you don't see, Sergeant. You and your people were a variable. An unnecessary one. Carter's jaw clenched. My people are soldiers, not variables. They bleed. They fight. They hold ground you wouldn't touch. Don't talk about them like they're numbers on a board. The generals exchanged glances, unimpressed. The third one, quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. You're not wrong, Sergeant. But wars aren't won by squads, they're won by strategy. And sometimes strategy means pulling pieces off the board. Even loyal ones. Her fists tightened at her sides. So that's it? You're dismantling us because we were in the wrong place at the wrong time? The first general's gaze was like ice. Yes. And because you asked too many questions. The silence after that was suffocating. Finally, the woman general leaned forward. Here's what will happen. Your squad will be reassigned individually. You will not operate together again. The file on your last mission will be sealed. And you will not discuss what you saw, or didn't see, in that valley. Do you understand? The words felt like bullets to her chest. Reassigned. Broken apart. Everything they'd fought through together, stripped away with a sentence. Carter forced her face blank. Yes, ma'am. She was dismissed back to the holding room. Her squad looked up the second she stepped inside, hope and fear battling in their eyes. Well? Dixon demanded. What's happening? Carter paused, helmet heavy in her hands. She wanted to tell them everything, to scream the truth. But she remembered the ice in the general's voice. One wrong word and her squad would be crushed before they even left this building. They're debriefing us, she said carefully. We'll get our assignments soon. The disappointment hit them like a physical weight. Dixon slammed his fist against the wall. Hale cursed again. Rains buried his face in his hands. Carter sat down among them, lowering her voice so only they could hear. Listen. Whatever happens, we don't let them break us. No matter where they send us, no matter what they say, we're still a squad. Understand? Their eyes met hers one by one. Dixon's anger softened into grim loyalty. Hale gave a sharp nod. Even Rains lifted his head, swallowing hard, determination flickering in his gaze. For the first time since the blow to her skull, Carter allowed herself the faintest smile. Good. Then we wait. And when the time comes, we'll make our own choices. The door slammed again, cutting off their fragile moment. More officers entered, clipboards ready, names on their lips. The squad braced, tension coiled like wire. Carter didn't know what came next. But she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of another war, one she hadn't chosen but one she'd fight all the same. The names rolled off the officers' clipboard one by one, each like a bullet severing another thread that held them together. Private Dixon, reassignment to Bravo Company, Kandahar. Dixon swore under his breath, shoulders tense. He didn't move right away until Carter gave him a nod. He shoved his rifle strap higher and muttered, "This is bullshit, Sarge. Total bullshit." "Keep your head down, Dixon," Carter murmured. "This isn't forever." His eyes searched hers, anger still hot, but beneath it trust. He nodded once before stepping toward the door, escorted out by 2 armed MPs like a prisoner instead of a soldier. Private Hale, Forward Reconnaissance, Northern Province. Hale gave a bitter laugh. Recon? With who? Some bunch of pencil pushers who don't know the dirt from their own boots. His voice cracked with frustration, but he caught himself and looked at Carter. Guess that's my line, huh? Yes, ma'am. Do your job, Hale. We'll find each other again, Carter said, steady. His jaw worked, teeth clenched, but he saluted her, quick, sharp, and left. Private Rains, stateside reassignment. Training Division, Fort Benning. Rains' head snapped up. His face was pale, eyes wide. Stateside? I don't want. His voice cracked, panic rising, but the MPs were already moving toward him. He scrambled back, looking wildly at Carter like a drowning man. Sarge. I didn't mean, back there, I didn't mean to. Carter gripped his arm before they could pull him away. You're still a soldier, Rains. Don't forget that. You keep training, you keep fighting, you hear me? Tears glimmered in his eyes, shame raw and visible, but he nodded frantically. Yes, Sergeant. Yes. They dragged him out, his voice fading down the hall. And just like that, her squad was gone. Stripped from her piece by piece until she sat alone in the cold metal room, helmet heavy in her lap, the silence crushing. The officer checked his clipboard again. Sergeant Carter, temporary hold. Await further instruction. She blinked, confusion spiking. Temporary hold? The others were scattered like leaves in the wind, but she was kept? The officer didn't explain. He turned and left, the door clanging shut. Hours passed. Maybe days. Time blurred in the sterile box where they left her, meals shoved through a slot, no clocks, no windows. She worked through push-ups, squats, shadowboxing, anything to keep her body sharp and her mind sharper. The blow to her head had left a lingering ache, but the fog had burned away, replaced by iron resolve. They thought breaking her squad would end her fight. They didn't understand. It only sharpened it. On the third day, at least she thought it was the third, the door finally opened. Two MPs flanked the entrance, and behind them stepped the woman general. Her uniform was immaculate, her face as hard as carved steel, but her eyes glittered with something Carter couldn't read. "Sergeant Carter. On your feet." Carter rose instantly, helmet tucked under her arm, every inch of her posture regulation perfect. "Ma'am?" The general studied her like a scientist examining a specimen. Then she gestured. "Walk with me." They moved through the labyrinth of steel corridors. Carter didn't speak, neither did the general, not until they stepped into an elevator that hummed as it carried them downward. "You impress me, Sergeant," the general said finally, her voice cool. "Most soldiers, when faced with dismantling, unravel. You adapt." Carter kept her eyes forward. "With respect, ma'am, soldiers don't get the luxury of unraveling." The general's mouth curved, again not a smile but something close. "Precisely why you're still here." The elevator opened into a chamber Carter couldn't believe existed in Afghanistan. High ceilings, glowing screens, a map table alive with digital overlays. Officers and analysts bustled everywhere. At the far end, a glass wall looked down into something even stranger. A hangar filled with equipment Carter didn't recognize, sleek vehicles and crates marked with stenciled codes that meant nothing to her. "This," the general said, leading her forward, "is where the real war is fought." Carter's stomach twisted. "What war is that, ma'am?" "The one the public doesn't see. The one most soldiers never know exists." They stopped at the map table. Red markers glowed across provinces, villages, cities. But there were other symbols, ones she didn't recognize, pulsing with faint blue light. "You and your squad stumbled into an area with one of these assets," the general said, tapping a blue marker. "Assets that cannot be compromised." Carter's jaw tightened. "So you pulled us out? Tore us apart?" "Yes. Because cohesion is dangerous when it's not controlled." The general turned, her gaze sharp as knives. "But you, Sergeant, you might still be useful." A dozen questions burned on Carter's tongue, but she held them back. She had learned long ago that listening was a weapon. "You'll be reassigned," the general continued, "not to a squad but to us. Direct operations. Silent operations. No records. No recognition." Carter blinked. "Black Ops. If you like crude labels, yes. We prefer strategic detachments." The air seemed to thin. She thought of Dixon's fury, Hale's curses, Rain's shame. Of Owens and Vickers, bleeding under her hands. Her squad torn apart because of some shadow war they weren't even allowed to understand. Her fists clenched at her sides. "And if I refuse?" The general's eyes narrowed. "You won't. Because if you do, your squad disappears. Not reassigned. Not transferred. Erased. Records wiped. Families told they were killed in action. Do you want that on your conscience?" Carter's throat tightened. It was blackmail dressed as patriotism. They weren't offering her a choice. They were chaining her with the lives of the only people she cared about. She forced her voice steady. "Understood, ma'am." The general studied her for another long moment, then nodded. "Good. You'll start immediately." That night, Carter was escorted to a new quarters. Bigger than the holding cell but colder. A single bunk, a desk, a locked footlocker. She sat on the edge of the bed, helmet beside her, staring at the steel walls. Her mind spun with everything unsaid. The way the generals had swooped in with surgical precision. The assets they spoke of. The hidden war beneath the one she'd bled in. And most of all, the gnawing question, why her? Because she adapted. Because she held her squad together even as they tried to shatter it. Because she wouldn't break. But deep down she knew there was another reason. They didn't trust her. They feared her. The first mission came 2 days later. No briefing with her squad, no shared jokes or fears. Just her and a sealed folder, handed over in silence. Inside, satellite images, coordinates, objectives marked with cold precision. Eliminate target. Recover intel. Leave no witnesses. It was war stripped of the thin veneer of honor. War's math. Carter suited up in gear she'd never worn before. Sleek, silent, designed for shadows, not fields. She moved through the motions, checking weapons, calibrating sights, but her chest ached with emptiness. For years, she'd fought shoulder to shoulder with her squad, hearing Dixon's smartass remarks, Hale's growls, Rain's nervous prayers. Now there was only silence. The mission went clean. Too clean. A compound raided at night, guards neutralized before they even drew breath, drives secured and packed away. Carter moved like a ghost, her training honed to razor edge. But when it was over, standing in the wreckage of lives erased, bile rose in her throat. Back at base, the general met her with approval. Efficient. Precise. You'll do well here. Carter saluted, but inside her mind screamed. That night, lying awake in the sterile quarters, she whispered their names like a prayer. Dixon. Hale. Rains. Owens. Vickers. She didn't know where they were. She didn't know if they were alive, safe, or already lost. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. They thought they'd broken her squad. They thought scattering them across the wind would end what they had. They were wrong. Because the bond between soldiers didn't vanish with orders or distance. It lived in scars, in memory, in loyalty written deeper than ink. And someday she'd bring them back together. But for now she'd play their game. She'd wear their mask, follow their shadow war, gather every scrap of information. She'd learn their secrets from the inside. And when the moment came, she'd turn those secrets against them. The generals thought she was their asset. But she was waiting, watching, becoming the knife they didn't see. And this war, the real war, was just beginning. The desert night was a living thing, breathing hot and silent across the valley. Sergeant Emily Carter crouched low against a jagged outcrop, NVG's glowing green across her vision. The compound below her pulsed with faint light, guards shifting in lazy patrols. She exhaled slowly, the weight of the suppressed M4 steady against her shoulder. Asset Alpha confirmed on sight, a voice crackled in her earpiece. Not Dixon's steady drawl, not Hale's gruff curses, not Rain's tremulous prayers, just the cold, clipped tone of an operator she'd never seen face to face. Green light. Proceed. Carter moved. Silent, efficient, every step measured. She breached the fence, slipped past a guard with a quick, precise strike that left him crumpled in the dirt. She moved like a shadow, the training drilled into her bones mixing with the new tools they'd handed her. Inside the compound, the targets went down quickly. Too quickly. It wasn't war, not like she'd known it. It was extermination. Faces that never had time to register fear before they fell, files snatched from safes, drives stuffed into black bags. Her superiors called it efficiency. She called it something else. When it was over, she stood in the ruin of another operation, blood cooling on her gloves. The operator's voice filled her ear again. Mission complete. Exfil point marked. Good work, Sergeant. She didn't answer. She just walked, the night swallowing her up. Back at base, the generals met her with nods of approval. You're adjusting well, Carter, the woman general said. Better than most. Adjusting. That was their word for it. As if adapting to butchery was some kind of skill. Carter kept her face blank, offered a crisp salute and walked away. Her quarters felt colder each time she returned. The walls seemed to press in tighter, the silence heavier. She cleaned her weapons, organized gear, forced herself through push-ups until her arms trembled. Anything to keep from thinking. But every night, when she finally lay back, the same faces came to her. Dixon with his quick wit, Hale with his scowl, Rains with his wide eyes. Owens and Vickers, broken and bleeding but alive. She couldn't stop replaying the last time she'd seen them. The MPs dragging them out, scattering them like pieces of paper in the wind. She didn't know if they were safe. She didn't know if they hated her for not fighting harder. But she knew one thing, they were out there. And she would find them. The first clue came weeks later. Carter was in the operations chamber, studying a map dotted with red and blue markers, when her eyes caught a familiar name. A village in Kandahar, tagged for an upcoming Op Bravo company, was already there. Dixon's reassignment. Her chest tightened. It could be coincidence. Could be nothing. But her gut said otherwise. That night she broke into the comms archive. She moved like a ghost through the steel corridors, bypassing cameras, slipping into the room where encrypted transmissions were stored. Her hands shook as she sifted through logs, searching for Bravo Company. And there it was, an after-action report filed under a different clearance level. She read it twice, breath shallow. Heavy firefight. Casualties sustained. Survivors awaiting reassignment. One name stood out, burned like fire in her mind. Private Dixon. Alive. Her throat tightened, relief mixing with fury. They'd scattered them, but they hadn't erased them. Not yet. The next morning, she stood straighter in the general's presence, her salute sharper. She played their soldier, their perfect ghost. But inside, her resolve burned hotter. She had to find the others. Her chance came on the next mission. She was flown out in a Black Hawk, dropped with a two-man silent team into the mountains. The objective was simple: intercept a convoy carrying intel drives. But halfway through the operation, as they crept through the jagged terrain, Carter heard voices ahead, not in Pashto, not in Dari. English. American. She froze, signaling the team to halt. Crawling forward, she peered through her scope. A squad of U.S. soldiers moved along the ridge, their gear dusty, their faces drawn. And among them, unmistakable, was Hale. Her chest nearly cracked open. Hale, grumpy, stubborn Hale, alive, trudging forward with his rifle slung low. He looked thinner, harder, but it was him. For a heartbeat, she almost broke cover. Almost called his name. But the cold voice in her earpiece snapped her back. Eyes on friendlies. Do not engage. Stay on mission. She swallowed hard, throat dry. Friendlies. They called them that, but they'd separated them, buried them under lies. She watched as Hale's squad disappeared into the rocks, her heart screaming to follow, her orders chaining her in place. The mission went clean like always. The convoy destroyed, intel secured. But Carter's hands shook as she packed her gear. She'd seen Hale. He was alive. That was enough for now. Back at base, she hid her trembling under discipline. But inside, her plan sharpened. Dixon. Hale. She'd found traces of them both. Rains, Owens, Vickers, they had to be out there too. The generals thought they owned her. They thought blackmail tied her hands. But they didn't understand. She wasn't their soldier. She wasn't their asset. She was waiting. Weeks turned into months. Missions blurred into one another, each one carving deeper lines into her soul. She learned to wear their mask, to smile when they praised her, to salute when they handed her orders. But every step forward was another stone in the foundation of her plan. She gathered scraps of intel, transfer orders left half-shredded, mission reports buried in encrypted files, overheard fragments of conversation. Piece by piece, she mapped her squad's fate. Rains pulled back stateside, trapped in a cycle of training recruits he didn't believe in. Owens medevac to Germany, his recovery slow but steady. Vickers reassigned to logistics, a desk and a file instead of a rifle. They were scattered but not gone. Not yet. And then came the night everything shifted. Carter had just returned from a mission, blood still tacky on her gloves, when she was summoned to the generals. The woman general's eyes gleamed sharper than usual as she slid a folder across the table. Your next assignment, she said. But this one is different. You'll have support. Soldiers from other detachments. Including a familiar face. Carter's fingers tightened on the folder. She opened it and her heart nearly stopped. Inside was a profile. Photo. Name. Private Dixon. Her breath caught. They were putting him on her team. The general's eyes narrowed, watching her reaction. Surprised, Sergeant? Carter forced her face blank. No, ma'am. Ready to work with whoever you assign. But inside, her heart roared. They were giving her Dixon back. It was a test. She knew it. They'd separated them for a reason, and now they were dangling him like bait. Maybe they wanted to see if she'd crack. Maybe they wanted to see if she'd turn. But they underestimated her. Because no matter what game they were playing, Carter had already decided. She wasn't just going to survive their shadow war. She was going to burn it down. The transport's engine screamed against the night sky as Sergeant Emily Carter strapped into the webbing, helmet low, eyes on the shadow seated opposite her. The vibration rattled through her bones, but it was nothing compared to the storm hammering her chest. Private Dixon. He sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight, face older than she remembered though only months had passed. Dust still streaked his uniform. His eyes, once quick with humor, now burned cold and sharp. He hadn't looked at her once. The bird banked, the red cabin light flickering across their faces. Carter gripped her rifle tighter. She wanted to speak, to cut through the silence that hung heavy between them, but the others packed in the Black Hawk made it impossible. Operators from other detachments, silent men with no names, no expressions. She couldn't risk a word here. But she felt his gaze flicker, just for a heartbeat, when the bird jolted through turbulence. A glance, hard and questioning before he turned away. Her stomach twisted. He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't forgiven. 2 minutes, the crew chief barked. Carter forced her breathing steady. Focus. Whatever hell they dropped her into, Dixon was beside her again. That was enough. The Black Hawk dipped, skids scraping the ground. Go, go, go. They spilled into the dust-choked dark, boots pounding hard earth, weapons raised. The night air smelled of oil and sand. Ahead, the faint outline of a convoy shimmered under the moonlight, trucks lumbering along a dirt road. The objective was simple on paper. Seize the convoy, extract a high-value prisoner. But Carter knew nothing was ever simple. They fanned out, operators moving like shadows. Carter signaled left, catching Dixon's movement in her periphery. He flowed like he always had, quiet, precise, but the rhythm was different. Harder. Colder. She swallowed the ache in her chest and focused. The first truck went up in flames, a rocket's trail cutting the night. Shouts tore from the convoy, gunfire rattling the hills. Carter dropped low, sighting, squeezing. A guard crumpled. Another dove for cover. The air erupted in chaos. She moved fast, weaving through dust and muzzle flash, her squad tearing into the convoy with brutal efficiency. Then she saw him, Dixon, advancing on the prisoner transport. His rifle barked, clearing the way. For a moment it was like before. Her right hand, his left, two halves of the same rhythm. They covered each other without words, fluid as water. But when they reached the transport and Carter wrenched the door open, Dixon's eyes met hers. And in that instant, the silence between them screamed louder than the battle. The prisoner, a gaunt man with shackled wrists, stumbled out. Dixon shoved him forward, his voice flat. Package secure. The words weren't for her. He didn't even look at her again. They exfiltrated under fire, the Black Hawk swooping back in, rotors chopping the smoke. Carter hauled the prisoner aboard, then swung Dixon up by the strap of his vest. For half a second, his hand brushed hers, and she felt nothing but tension, stiff and cold. The bird lifted, leaving the burning convoy behind. Carter sat across from him, helmet shadowing her face, heart pounding too loud. Dixon's eyes finally met hers. Not warm, not forgiving. Accusing. The debrief dragged on hours later, the generals praising the operation's efficiency, their voices smug with satisfaction. Carter stood at attention, silent, her face blank. Dixon did the same beside her, his answers clipped, mechanical. When it ended, the operators dispersed. Carter turned, ready to follow, but Dixon's voice stopped her. Sergeant. She froze. Slowly she turned. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned. He waited until the hall was clear, then stepped closer, his voice low. You. His jaw clenched. I should have known they'd put me with you. Carter's throat tightened. Dixon, don't. His glare cut her. You let them tear us apart. You stood there and saluted while they dragged us out like trash. And now you're their perfect little ghost. The words stabbed deep, each one sharp and merciless. I didn't have a choice, she said, voice raw. There's always a choice. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally she forced the words out. I never stopped looking for you. For all of you. I'm still fighting Dixon. Just not the way they think. His eyes searched hers, suspicion hard as steel. Prove it. Her chest ached. I will. He turned, walked away without another word. Carter stood alone, her heart pounding, the general's shadow pressing heavier than ever. The missions kept coming. Carter and Dixon were paired again, each op a test, each one tightening the noose. They worked flawlessly together in the field, covering angles, trading signals, moving like clockwork. But off mission, the silence between them was colder than any battlefield. Every time she looked at him, she saw the unspoken question in his eyes. Do I trust you? Or do I put you down? It wore on her, grinding her nerves raw. But she held the line, gathering scraps of intel, piecing together the web that bound them. And then came the night she nearly broke. The mission was a raid on a suspected weapons cache, deep in the mountains. Intel said minimal resistance. Intel lied. The ambush came fast, gunfire exploding from the rocks, RPGs tearing the air. The team scattered for cover, bullets whining past. Carter dove behind a boulder, shouting orders. Suppressing fire, right flank. Dixon was already there, cutting down attackers with ruthless precision. But the enemy pressed harder, closing in. Then Carter heard it, one of the operators screaming as he went down, his legs shredded. The man crawled, blood smearing the dirt. Leave him, another operator barked. We don't have time. Carter's chest clenched. Everything in her screamed to move, to drag him out. But she hesitated. Orders. Efficiency. That was the game here. And then Dixon's voice ripped through the chaos. Carter. She snapped her head. He was staring at her, eyes blazing, one hand pointing at the downed operator. Her choice. For a heartbeat, she froze. Then she moved. She sprinted into the open, rounds cracking past her ears, dirt exploding at her boots. She grabbed the operator, heaved him over her shoulder, staggered back toward cover. Dixon's rifle thundered, cutting down anything that moved. She dove behind the rocks, dragging the man to safety, lungs burning. Dixon crouched beside her, covering her flank. His eyes met hers, still hard, still guarded, but something flickered there. Something that wasn't hatred. Respect. The fight ended minutes later, the team exfiltrating bloody but alive. Back at base, the generals were less than pleased. Unnecessary risk, one snapped. Your orders were clear. Carter stood at attention, jaw tight. With respect, sir, leaving him would have compromised morale. We need every soldier alive. The general's eyes narrowed. But she saw it just for a second. Doubt. Dismissed, Carter walked out, every nerve buzzing. Dixon was waiting in the hall. His face was unreadable, but his voice was quiet when he spoke. You could have left him. Carter met his eyes. I'm not like them. For the first time his expression softened. Just a little. Maybe not, he said. But you're not out either. Not yet. Then he walked away. But this time the silence he left behind wasn't as heavy. Days bled into weeks. Carter and Dixon's rhythm sharpened, their partnership reforged under fire. Trust was slow, fragile, but it grew with every mission, every choice she made to save lives instead of follow orders blindly. And the more they worked, the more cracks she saw in the general's facade. Whispers of corruption, secret deals, missions that didn't add up. Carter pieced it together, each thread weaving a darker picture. They weren't just fighting enemies overseas. They were fighting ghosts of their own making, black ops cover-ups, backroom deals, shadow wars with no accountability. And Carter knew, sooner or later she'd have to choose. Stay their weapon. Or break them. The night that choice came closer, she and Dixon were debriefed alone. The woman general's eyes pinned them like knives. You're both performing exceptionally, she said. Which is why your next assignment is critical. She slid a folder across the table. Inside, photos, maps, intel. And names. Carter's chest went cold. Owens. Rains. Vickers. Her squad. The general's smile was thin. They've been reassigned in ways that complicate matters. We need them neutralized before they become liabilities. Carter's stomach turned to ice. Neutralized. She glanced at Dixon. His jaw was stone, his fists tight at his sides. The general's voice was smooth, deadly. We trust you two to handle it. Quietly. Carter's heart thundered. They were ordering her to kill her own squad. She met Dixon's eyes. For once there was no silence, no wall. Just fire. And in that instant she knew. The war had changed. It wasn't about missions anymore. It was about survival. The folder lay open on the steel table, its contents like a loaded weapon pointed at Sergeant Emily Carter's chest. Photos of her old squad stared up at her. Owens in a hospital bed, face pale but eyes defiant. Rains in uniform, saluting a line of recruits. Vickers hunched over a desk, paperwork stacked high beside him. Her people. Her family. The woman general's voice was calm, almost casual. Neutralization will be clean. Painless. No trail. You two are the only ones we trust with this. Carter's pulse hammered. Across the table Dixon's jaw tightened, his fists flexing against his thighs. He didn't speak but his eyes burned into hers. The general mistook the silence for obedience. She slid the folder shut with deliberate care. Orders are clear. Depart in 48 hours. Briefing ends. Dismissed. Carter saluted, the motion sharp but hollow. Dixon mirrored her, face carved from stone. Together they turned and walked out, boots striking hard against the polished floor. The corridor was long, lined with fluorescent light that hummed like static. Only when they reached the far end, the doors hissing shut behind them, did Dixon break the silence. His voice was low, dangerous. They want us to kill them. Carter's throat tightened. Yes. His eyes cut to hers, dark and furious. So what's your move? Still playing their good little ghost? Or are you finally ready to fight back? She stopped, staring at him. For the first time since they'd been reunited, there was no mask between them. No silence. I'm not killing them, she said, voice steady. Not Owens. Not Rains. Not Vickers. Not any of them. Dixon studied her, searching for cracks, for lies. Then slowly he nodded. Good, he said. Because if you'd said otherwise, I'd have put a bullet in you myself. Her chest loosened just slightly. Trust, fragile, tentative but real, passed between them. But the danger hadn't lessened. If the generals even suspected they were wavering, both of them would vanish before sunrise. They had 48 hours. Back in her quarters, Carter spread the stolen scraps of intel across her bunk. Transfer orders. Deployment rosters. Medical reports. Threads she'd been weaving in secret for months. Dixon sat opposite, silent at first, eyes scanning the papers with growing tension. They're scattered, she murmured, pointing. Owens is still in Germany, recovery phase. Rains is stateside, training recruits. Vickers is stuck in logistics at Fort Carson. Dixon's hand tapped the desk, restless. 3 different continents. And we've got less than 2 days before they expect us to report movement. Carter nodded. If we don't act, they'll send someone else. Someone who won't hesitate. Silence stretched. Then Dixon leaned forward, voice sharp. So what's the plan? Her mind raced. Every instinct screamed against the impossible scale of it. Extraction under surveillance. Evading military intelligence nets. Protecting 3 people across oceans while keeping up the illusion of obedience. And yet, impossible didn't matter. These were her people. She'd already lost them once. She wouldn't lose them again. We fake it, she said finally. We make it look like we're following orders. Meanwhile we get them out, quiet, off the grid. Safe. Dixon studied her, then gave a grim nod. Risky as hell. But better than handing their heads to those bastards. Carter exhaled, resolve solidifying. We'll need help. Resources. Someone outside the chain. Got anyone in mind? A name flickered in her thoughts. Not a soldier. A contractor she'd met years ago in Kabul, a fixer who could make things vanish, equipment, people, records. If he was still alive, still working, he might be their only shot. She told Dixon. He didn't like it, she could see it in the way his jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. Fine, he said. But if this guy screws us, I'll put him down myself. The next 48 hours blurred into a storm of preparation. Carter moved with precision, fabricating reports, tweaking mission logs to suggest surveillance on their targets. Dixon covered her tracks, feeding just enough information up the chain to keep suspicion low. And in the quiet moments, between stolen meetings and whispered plans, Carter caught glimpses of the man she'd thought she'd lost. Dixon's humor flickered once, dry and sharp, when she nearly tripped over a carelessly coiled cable. His laugh was short, bitter, but real. It gave her strength. But every time she thought of Owens lying in a hospital bed, of Rains drilling recruits who didn't know the truth, of Vickers buried in files instead of fighting, it hardened into fire. They were coming for them. The first extraction was Owens. Germany. A military hospital outside Ramstein, guarded and monitored but not impenetrable. Carter and Dixon arrived under forged orders, posing as escorts for transfer. The fixer, going by the name Levi now, had provided uniforms, credentials, even a vehicle. Owens' eyes widened when he saw them enter his room. His face was pale, his body thin, but the spark in his eyes hadn't dimmed. Carter? Dixon? His voice cracked, disbelief flooding it. You're alive? Carter's throat tightened as she moved to his bedside. So are you. Dixon smirked, dry as dust. Barely. Owens laughed, then winced at the pain in his ribs. But the sound was real, alive. We don't have time, Carter said. We're pulling you out. Now. Owens stared, shock flickering into fear. Out? You don't understand, they watch me. Every day. If I vanish, alarms. Already covered, Dixon cut in. Records say you died this morning. Complications from surgery. Owens blinked. You forged my death? Would you rather we made it real? Dixon shot back. Despite the tension, Owens laughed again, shaking his head. You haven't changed. Minutes later they were moving. Carter and Dixon wheeled him out on a stretcher, their forged orders carrying them past the guards. Levi's vehicle waited outside, engine running. As the hospital shrank in the rearview mirror, Carter felt something she hadn't in months. Oh. The second was Rains. Stateside. A training base in North Carolina, crawling with MPs and cameras. The risk was higher, but the plan was sharper this time. Dixon created a diversion, a staged brawl between recruits that spiraled into chaos. While MPs scrambled, Carter slipped into the barracks. She found Rains in his office, bent over papers, muttering under his breath. He looked up, eyes wide. Sergeant Carter? His voice cracked. What? How? No time. She grabbed his arm, pulling him up. We're getting you out. Shock froze him. But, my orders, Their lies, she snapped. All of it. You're a pawn in their game, Rains. We all are. Do you trust me? His eyes darted, fear clashing with faith. Finally he nodded. Yes. They moved fast, slipping through service tunnels, exiting into the chaos Dixon had unleashed. Within minutes they were gone, another ghost vanishing into the night. The last was Vickers. Fort Carson. By then Carter and Dixon were running on fumes, nerves frayed, every step a risk. Levi warned them they were close to exposure, that their forged reports were raising questions. But Carter refused to stop. Vickers was harder. He wasn't in a hospital or a base barracks. He was in an office stacked with paperwork, guarded by bureaucracy instead of rifles. When Carter and Dixon entered, he blinked at them like they were hallucinations. "You've got to be kidding me." "No joke," Dixon said. "Pack your crap. You're coming with us." Vickers leaned back, shaking his head. "Do you have any idea what kind of hole you're digging? They'll come after you with everything." Carter stepped forward, eyes burning. "Then we'll fight. But I'm not leaving you here to be buried alive." Vickers studied her, then Dixon, then sighed. "God, I missed you idiots." Minutes later he was gone too. Together again. Owens weak but alive. Raines nervous but loyal. Vickers grumbling but sharp. Dixon at her side. Carter looked at them around the safe-house table, the fixer's hideout humming with generator light. For the first time in months her squad was whole. But the weight didn't lift. Because she knew the generals would already be moving. They'd see the holes in her reports. The false trails. The lies. And when they realized their orders had been defied, they wouldn't hesitate. They'd unleash hell. Carter met Dixon's eyes across the table. He gave a grim nod, understanding unspoken. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were targets. And the war was about to come to them. The safehouse walls hummed with the sound of the generator, but Sergeant Emily Carter couldn't shake the silence pressing over her squad. They sat around the table, Owens leaning back weakly, Vickers grumbling under his breath, Raines tapping his knee in nervous rhythm. Dixon stood against the wall, arms crossed, his shadow long in the dim light. They were whole again. And yet Carter knew the storm was already moving toward them. "They'll come," Dixon said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, certain. "They'll bring everything. Drones. Operators. The works." Vickers scoffed, though his eyes were tight. "Hell, we barely made it out of Fort Carson with my boots on. What makes you think we can stand up to an entire machine designed to erase us?" Carter leaned forward, voice steady. "Because we don't have a choice. We're already ghosts on their reports. They'll erase us whether we fight or not. So we fight smart." Raines looked up, fear and fire warring in his eyes. "Fight with what? We've got one rifle each, a safe house held together with duct tape, and Owens here still looks like death warmed over." Owens gave a weak grin. "Appreciate the confidence, buddy." Dixon pushed off the wall, stepping closer to the table. "She's right. We don't get to run from this. But we can hit back. Hard enough to make them bleed. Hard enough to make them think twice." Carter met his eyes. They were steady now, locked with hers, no hesitation. "We need leverage," she said. "Proof. Intel. Something that exposes what they're doing, splitting squads, blackmail, shadow ops. If we can make it public, they can't bury us without burying themselves." Vickers let out a bitter laugh. "You're talking about taking on generals, Carter? Entire chains of command. They've got lawyers, media control, spin doctors. All we've got is..." He gestured around the shabby safe house. "This." "Not true," Dixon said. "We've got Levi." The fixer stepped into the room, cigarette glowing faint in the dark. "I was wondering when someone would remember me," he said with a smirk. "You want the truth out? You'll need access. Servers. Files. The kind of evidence you can't argue with." Carter stood, resolve hardening. "Then that's the mission. Not survival. Not running. We take the fight to them. One last op." Silence. Then, slowly, one by one, her squad nodded. Even Owens, pale and battered, lifted his hand. "Guess I'm in. Can't let you lunatics have all the fun." Carter felt something swell in her chest. Fear, pride, fire. "Then we move." They left the safe house at dawn, vanishing into the countryside. Levi's contacts provided transport, weapons, disguises. But the farther they moved, the heavier the air felt. Drones buzzed overhead more often. Checkpoints appeared on roads they'd once traveled freely. The generals knew. By the third night, they tracked down a lead, an off-book server farm tucked into a desert installation, humming with encrypted files. If they could breach it, pull data, and leak it through Levi's channels, the truth might survive. But it would be suicide if they misstepped. The night of the op, Carter gathered them in the scrub brush overlooking the compound. The air was dry, the moon a thin crescent above. "This is it," she whispered. "In and out, fast and clean. We breach here, north wall, blind spot between cameras. Dixon and I clear the way. Vickers, you handle the server extraction. Raines covers Owens. We hold as long as we need to, then we burn everything and run." Dixon gave a sharp nod. "No speeches. No second chances. Let's move." They went silent, sliding into the dark. The breach was fast. Too fast. Carter's instinct screamed as they slipped through the fence, bypassing the guards with unsettling ease. The compound seemed lightly staffed. Wrong. She signaled halt, crouching low. Dixon slid beside her, whisper sharp. It's a trap. Before she could answer, the night exploded. Floodlights blazed. Alarms shrieked. Gunfire erupted from the towers. Contact left. Rains roared, firing bursts into the blinding lights. Bullets tore the ground around them. Carter dove, returning fire. Dixon cursed, dragging Owens behind cover. Vickers clutched his laptop bag like a lifeline, eyes wide. They knew. Rains shouted. They were waiting. Carter's blood pounded. Of course they knew. The generals hadn't been fooled. They wanted them all in one place. One grave. But she wasn't about to die quietly. Suppressing fire, she barked, popping from cover, cutting down a guard on the tower. Dixon mirrored her, bullets precise, brutal. Move, he shouted. They sprinted, weaving through the chaos, Rains and Owens firing wild cover while Vickers clutched his gear. They crashed through a side door, slamming it shut behind them. The hall inside hummed with servers, rows of blinking lights. Vickers gaped. You've got to be kidding me. They actually lured us into the data farm. Then make it worth it, Carter snapped. Pull everything. Every file. Every dirty secret. Now. Vickers scrambled to the nearest terminal, plugging in, fingers flying. Cover me. The others spread out, weapons raised. Gunfire hammered against the walls outside. Boots thundered closer. Rains glanced at Carter, eyes wide. We can't hold this forever. We don't need forever, Vickers muttered, sweat dripping down his face. Just 3 more minutes. The first breach came like thunder, operators flooding the hall, rifles blazing. Carter and Dixon opened fire, dropping the first wave, but more poured in behind them. Owens, pale and shaking, dragged himself to cover, firing bursts with trembling hands. Not today. Carter's ears rang with gunfire, the room a storm of chaos. She dropped another operator, swung, fired again. 2 minutes. Vickers shouted. Dixon was a wall, his rifle spitting fury, his voice raw. Come on. You want us. Come get us. Another wave hit. Rains went down with a cry, blood splattering his leg. Carter yanked him behind cover, pressing hard. Stay with me, damn it. 1 minute. Vickers yelled. Carter's chest burned, her arms shaking from the recoil. She glanced at Dixon, blood on his shoulder, teeth bared, still firing. Their eyes met across the storm, and for a heartbeat it was like old times. Unbreakable. Download complete. Vickers screamed. He yanked the drive free, clutching it like salvation. Then move. Carter roared. They fell back, dragging Rains, Owens limping, bullets tearing the walls around them. Dixon fired last, covering their retreat, then shoved through the door as Carter hurled a grenade back. The explosion rocked the hall, flames chasing them out into the night. They ran until their lungs burned, until the compound was just smoke on the horizon. Finally they collapsed behind a ridge, gasping, bleeding, alive. Vickers held up the drive with shaking hands. It's all here. Proof. Every mission. Every name. Everything they tried to bury. Carter's chest heaved. For a moment she allowed herself to believe. Maybe this would be enough. Maybe the truth would survive. Then the whir of rotors cut the night. She froze, heart plummeting. Above, the silhouette of helicopters descended, floodlights spearing the dark. Move! Dixon shouted, dragging Rains up. But it was too late. Figures dropped from ropes, surrounding them in a ring of rifles. Carter raised her weapon, teeth clenched. Dixon at her side. Owens, Rains, Vickers behind. The circle closed in. And then she saw them. 3 figures stepping from the chopper, dust swirling around their boots. The generals. The woman general's smile was thin, sharp as a blade. Sergeant Carter, she said, voice carrying over the rotors. Did you really think you could run forever? Carter's pulse thundered. Around her the squad shifted, tense, desperate. Dixon's hand brushed hers, steady, grounding. The general's eyes gleamed in the harsh light. Hand over the drive. Or watch them die. Silence hung, thick and crushing. Carter's hand tightened on her rifle. Her heart hammered. Every instinct screamed. And then, slowly she smiled. Ma'am, she said, voice calm, steady, unshaken. You have no idea what you've started. The floodlights blazed, rifles raised, the generals waiting. Carter's squad stood defiant, battered but unbroken. The war wasn't over. It was only beginning. The end.